Good morning. Today I'm going to be making a couple, well, I'll make one flower, but I'll show you how to do both centers because it's essentially the same flower. These are wafer paper, kind of like a rose, with one of them has a little roughly center. Turn it so you can see that. So it's got like a little roughly center. And the other one has a regular kind of covered rose center that looks like it hasn't opened up. And the only difference between the size of these two is that I've put more petals on this one. So you can make them as big as you want. This one is about 3 inches, 2.5 inches across. This one is about 4 inches, 4.5. No, it's about 4 inches. So you can make them giant. You can make an enormous one. Wafer paper is so light, you can make really big flowers and not have to worry about them weighing too much on the cake. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm taking, this is a 1.5 inch styrofoam ball. It's the little crinkly kind of styrofoam. It's not the smooth styrofoam. All right, I'm going to smash this to flatten it out, and I'm going to put a wire through it. Now it's flat on one side, as you can see. I'm going to put a wire through it so that the round side is the base. Like that's where the stem comes out, okay? I don't glue these on because that's just an extra step. I take that, you see it against my sweater. I'm gonna make a little hook. Okay, I hate this camera. Okay, there's a little hook, and I'm just gonna pull this straight down into the styrofoam. Okay, and then on the base side, I'm gonna turn this around, bend it one way, bend it the other way. So now there's essentially like a little bend here. You can see that. Then I'm going to stick my finger right in the middle, pull that up, and press the little bend into it. That will hold it stiff. You don't have to use hot glue or anything to keep the styrofoam attached to the wire. So that's step one, and the reason that I'm doing the flat side up is because that's where I'm going to attach the little roughly petal section. If you wanted to do just a regular rose center, you could do the rounder side up if you wanted it to be rounder, but I'm going to do this way so that I can attach the roughly parts on there. Okay, so that's the first step. For the next part, I have taken a square, this is just a regular sheet of wafer paper. Let me move this out of the way. This is just a sheet of wafer paper. I've cut out a little piece out of here, and I've put water around the edges of it and wrapped it around the ball. So that that's covered. It just kind of gives you a base to work on. It doesn't have to be pretty. I've just wrapped it around here, and then I've let it dry for a while. So at this point, it's ready to work with. And I'm going to do the next section. And you don't have to do, I would say you don't have to do that, but I found that it's just easier to have, like something to glue the paper onto, because otherwise you're going to be trying to glue it onto the styrofoam. All right, the next part, I'm going to do the roughly center. I'm cutting a strip that is a little over, it's somewhere between 1/2 inch and 3/4 inches. This is a sheet of a gradient wafer paper that I printed. And I am using printed wafer paper for this. You can use white or you can color it a different way. I just find it's easier to print it. And you can buy printed wafer paper in my shop. I can do custom colors, whatever. All right, to do the center, you're going to take the strip and just kind of fold it. You don't have to fold it hard, and if it breaks because you fold it and it's dry, that's okay. I'm going to cut, let's see where the little loop is? I'm just going to cut that. And then I'm going to cut some little notches in it. Like I said, if this comes undone and it breaks, it's fine. All right, now I'm just going to kind of notch this out so that it's uneven a little bit, because you don't want it completely even, because that'll make it look unnatural. All right, and then when you're done, you're going to have a strip that is, kind of a little wavy. And I'm going to take some water. For this, you don't want to use a tremendous amount of water, you just want to use a little bit. And you can use vodka if you want it to dry faster, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use a little water. I'm brushing just a little bit on here. There must be something on my brush because it's getting purple. And it will pick up the food coloring if you've printed out the paper. It's not a big deal. All right, I'm not even going to put this brush back in the water. I'm going to leave it right there. Now I'm going to take this kind of curl this up a little bit and press it on here. Now that's not going to be sticky enough, so I'm going to take the brush and just wet the center a little bit. And I'm going to stick the non-cut side, obviously, onto that sticky part and then start wrapping it around. And you can go back into here later. Ooh, I think I just dropped it. You can go back in here later and notch this out a little bit if it's going to look too even, because you don't want it to look completely flat. But that's how that works. Let me get this. Now this is a demo. If you drop that on the floor and you're really making these, throw that piece away. But since nobody's going to be using this for anything, I don't care. All right, and if it dries out like that, just put a little more water on the paper, and that's why you cover the ball with the paper, because you want to give this something to grip to. Now if you're doing the regular rose with the different colored center, all you do is cut out a few little circles and kind of wrap them around the styrofoam ball like you'd be wrapping if you were just making a gum paste flower. But for this, we're just making a little spiral and gluing it down, and you just kind of press it on there. It is pretty stiff. I'm pressing it fairly hard with my palm, but see how that just kind of grips on there? You're making like a little rooster comb. So now I guess you could make a little rooster too if you wanted to. But that's going to give the center the fluffy look. And then, as I mentioned before, if it looks too even, just go in and kind of do this. It's very freeform. You don't want to make it too short. But you also don't want it to be completely even, because then it doesn't look right. Because nothing in nature is perfectly symmetrical. And this obviously is not botanically correct, but that's okay. All right, so that's your step 2. I'm going to continue around here. I'm going to put some more water around this edge and wrap another strip around there. So that's going to take 2 strips. That is the length of the paper, and that pretty much covers the center. So that's the second step. And then stick this in the styrofoam and let it dry. Okay, the next step, once you have covered the entire center, and I didn't do all the way up to exactly to the edge, so there's a little tiny bit of the edge left here, but you would just want to cover most of the center with the little frilly pieces. Once you've done this and you've let it dry, and this is dry now so I can mess around with it without getting my hands stuck, you're going to cut out the outer petals. Now if you're doing a rose, what you do for the center, instead of doing the fluffy things, just take a couple of like 2 or 3 rose petals and cover the center with those. And I think on this one it actually looks like the center petals have opened up and it's just showing the ball where it was covered. So that's another reason why you want to cover the ball with the paper that you're using so that it's the same color, because sometimes if you don't, you can look down, like if you can see right in here, it's where the edges aren't completely touching each other. There's little spaces, and like that's a big one right there. So if you, I can't tilt this the right way there. If you can see down inside that and it's a different color, it's going to be pretty obvious that it's just styrofoam. So it's a good idea to cover the ball with the wafer paper for many reasons. And anyway, so back to the rose. If you're going to do a rose, just do the center like that and don't worry about doing the frilly part. And for these petals, you just cut out random petal shapes. And you know what a petal cutter looks like. Cut out some shapes like that, do some small ones for the inside, and then as they get out to the edge, you're going to use a larger shape. For this one, this is like a little kind of wild rose with the frilly center. I'm going to use a circle cutter because I want the petals to be kind of more uniform. And you can do this if you want to do a ranunculus. It's the same kind of idea. The petal, the center is going to be different, but it's the same idea with the circles. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to use the darker color for the inner petals and make it go lighter as it gets to the outside. So the inner ones, this is a 1.5 inch circle cutter. I don't know, and there's no science to this. Do it however you want. And I know I say that a lot in many of my videos, but that's because it's true. The cake police are not going to come and get you. The wafer paper police don't exist. You can do whatever you want, and that's how people figure things out. So just try it out for yourself. I just did 8. I'm going to do 4 more, so I have a total of 12. But like I said, you can use as many or as few as you want. It'll just give your flower a different look. So the more petals that you have, the, you know, kind of roughlier it's going to be. Now, for the first row, see this is printed on this side, but not this side. And the way these petals end up is that you kind of see the outside of them. So for the first maybe 2 or 3 rows, I'm going to put the printed side facing out. And you can experiment with this. If you're worried about it, you can print color on both sides of the flower, or of the paper. That's not a problem. Oops, I just put it the wrong way, of course. So I'm just going to stick that on there. And I'm going to put this kind of up over it so that the base of this is kind of even with the base of that, okay? Because you're going to want these petals to curl in over that once you are done. Now when I print the paper, I always print on the smooth side. But if it's printed on both sides, it's obviously going to have the color on both sides. I've noticed that when you steam these, which is going to be, you know, at the end of this process, that they tend to curl toward the flat side, if that makes sense. And I'll show you when we do it. But you want to kind of take that into consideration too, because if you want it to curl in, then you might want to print the rough side if you're putting it this way. But that takes a lot of advanced planning, and I did not think that far ahead, nor do you really need to. So I've put 5 petals there. I think I'll do one more row going around. So I'm putting the water on the unprinted side, and I'm just sticking it on so that they overlap. See, it's not where it goes down like that. I'm covering that up so it's not completely even. And as you go out, like each row, you want to put these down a little bit lower. So I'm going to put that one right here. Because as a flower petal opens up and it falls down away from the center. You don't want them all to be the same length, I mean the same height, you know, as you're holding the flower up. The outer row should be lower just a little bit. And the reason that I flattened this out at the beginning, I think I just put that one on backwards. No, I did it the right way. The reason I flattened this out at the beginning is that when you're putting petals on a round shape, it's going to make the flower really round looking, and flowers don't usually look really round. They look more of like a flattened oval if you hold it up. I don't even know if that makes sense, but it's more of like a triangular shape if you hold up the flower and look at the side. Like that's round, but if you look at it that way, it's not round. And if you have a round ball that's completely round, it's going to be too deep this way when you're done. It's also going to make it difficult to put on the cake because there's so much flour underneath it that it just takes up too much space. And that's just, you know, for practical purposes, you want it to be a little flatter. Okay, so now I have used up all of the smaller ones that I made. Now if you want to, you can let that dry. You don't really need to, and it's actually good to keep working because the sticky part down here with the water is going to help grab onto the next row of petals. So the next thing, I'm going to go in, let's see, I'm going to use the larger cutter, which is a 2-inch cutter, and I'm going to cut out some more circles. And you could actually cut them, you can cut them like this if you want. You don't have to have it completely round because this bottom part is going to be on the bottom of the flower, and you're not going to see that. So if you're running out of paper, just do that. That could get you a few extra petals out of the paper that you have. Now I am going to put up a photo guide to this thing on my blog also. And there are a couple things that I've done, that I have done on my blog or will be doing during this tutorial, and I'll put the links on my blog to that too, so you can go and see a picture, like a step-by-step of it, if you don't want to watch the whole video. Okay, so the next step, take the larger ones, And for these, I'm going to put the printed side facing the inside because I want them to open up that way. And so you're going to see more of the color as it opens up that way. And you just want to keep going around. I'm going to put this here, just overlap the petals, and you want to bring these down closer to the base at this point. And this is, I won't say it can be a lot faster than gum paste. It's obviously a lot faster with the drying time than gum paste. I still think that if you do a really nice gum paste flower, it looks better than wafer paper. But you can also spend a tremendous amount of time on wafer paper and have it look very realistic. So it all depends on how much time you want to spend. And one is not necessarily better than the other, they're just different. You have to kind of figure out how to manipulate them. Now, if you wanted to go in before you put this together, you could take some shortening, some Crisco, and kind of rub it all over here, and that will make the flower petal softer. But, you know, honestly, it's not going to give you that much more. I don't know. It depends on how much you want to manipulate it. Like I just said, you know, how much time you want to spend on this. So these are good to do if you have a bunch of flowers and you're not sure how many you need. And you can just kind of throw them together at the last minute if you're short one or two. All right, so now I've got this. I've got the larger petals arranged on there. They're coming almost all the way down to the base. And I'm going to do one more row that goes around the base here, almost to the end. And you've noticed that I'm not cutting, like you can cut a slit in these and make them a little bit rounder. I'm not bothering with that because you can pinch it here if you wanted to do that. It's not necessary to do that. And also, like I said, if you're doing a rose and you want these petals to be a little more irregular on the surface instead of being round, just cut out the rose petals. Rose petals are kind of shaped like this. They're not a circle. And then you can go back and kind of, you know, just kind of make the edges a little wiggly. And that's how you do the rose petals. But other than that, it's the same process to put these together. So I'm going to do, let's say I'll do 6 more. I'll do 7 more. For some reason, the odd numbers just look better to me. I don't know why. And you know how people say, oh, do 3 petals, then 5 petals, then 7 petals on a rose. If you go look at a real rose, you're not going to find that. So you can do as many petals as you want. I've never seen a rose that had the same number as the gum paste instructors tell you to do. But I think the odd numbers just do look better for some reason. All right, now for this one, I'm going to start putting these down toward the base to kind of cover that up. And it's not going to be completely covered up. But that's all right. If you wanted to, you could go back and put a dark green calyx on there. But, you know, the way I figure it, most of these flowers are stuck right up against the cake like that anyway. So if the cake is here, you're not really seeing the back. So unless you want to see the calyx, you don't really need to put one on. And for the people who are screaming, that's not what a real flower looks like to yourself. We're not going for botanically correct. We're going for make your client happy and make a pretty flower. That's all. So if you are going to plan on entering contests and impressing horticulturalists, then this is probably not the method to do it. You need to go out and take some real flowers apart and look at them because the petals are not perfectly round, obviously. And taking a real flower apart is very interesting because you'll see that the petal shapes are nothing like the cutters that you can get and that kind of thing. All right, so that was the last step. So now we've got this all put together, and the next thing I'm going to do is steam this. So I will get some hot water boiling, and that will be the next part. Okay, now I have this little pot of steaming water, and be careful when you hold your hands over here because you're going to burn yourself. And it's very cold today, so I can do this and it actually feels nice, but you don't, you know, just be careful. All right, so you want to take the flower and first hold it kind of over the steam like this so that you get the middle petals softened up a little bit. And just kind of experiment. See how long you can hold it up there. You don't want to do this so long that it melts. And keep in mind that wafer paper is not paper, it is potato starch. It's just a big sheet of starch. You need to think of it that way, or else it's going to give you a lot of trouble. Okay, so after you have, you're going to stick this in the pan, and you can actually stick it down into the pan like that. See how these petals are starting to soften up, and you can manipulate them where you want them. And that's the reason that I put the color on the outside of these, because I want them to fold. I want them to fold in. I apologize for my lovely camera where I'm watching the flower, not the camera. Okay, so like I said, hold this down in here, and you can use one of those little portable steamers too. I just think it's kind of silly to have extra stuff you have to buy and keep track of. So hot on the stove works well. So those are soft, and you can move them where you want them. Now you're going to do the same thing, kind of hold the outer petals over the steam sideways and kind of keep an eye on them. They're going to start to curve, and then you can move them where you want them to be. Don't force it, because if it's not moving, it's not wet enough. That one moved very nicely out. So I'm going to be careful not to get that one too tremendously wet. I'll hold that one up away. And you want to kind of watch, they'll start to move and change position in the steam. And you can bring them out. And this is really something that you have to try yourself. It's hard to tell someone exactly what to do, because it's going to be different every time. But if you try it yourself, you'll be able to see how wet you can get it, how close you can get to the steam. It's going to be different every time. If you have the paper printed on both sides, it reacts differently than if you just print it on one side. So that's what I've got now. This one is a little too much, so I'm going to stick it back in here to soften it up. See how that just flopped right down? And I'm going to bring it up like that, so that it dries in a more upright position. Okay. So that will soften it up, and you can do this as long as you want. It will soften the petals. You can work them a little bit, and then you can let them set up again, and they dry out pretty quickly. Unless you dump this in the water, it's not going to be like super wet. So don't dump it in the water. But see how you can move that? And they, you know, like I said, sometimes they'll move in a certain direction, and that's not what you want. So you have to just try to stick that one side over here and bend it out gently, gently. See, and I've just bent that out, and it's pretty much dried in that position already. So it doesn't take long. And if you wanted to, you could do this as you're putting the flower together. If you want to get these petals here, because when you put these together and then steam them, you get a certain look, but you can't control the middle petals as much. So I like this, you know, that if that's not what you're going for and you want these petals to go out farther, just steam these as you're putting the whole thing together, and it'll work that way. So that's basically how you do this flower. And if you have any questions, you can leave them for me. I will answer as soon as I can. It's really not difficult, and it goes pretty fast. So that's a nice flower. If you wanted to do it all one color, obviously that's fine. I just did it this way for variety. But leave me any questions and I will answer them as soon as I can. I am going to do this for a blog entry so that you can read through the steps. So I'll put the links to that in the description of this video also.